Listen, Jeremy Weinglass, our maestro in residency, for those of you that have not appreciated or know Jeremy, I've had the privilege of listening to this man now for more than a couple of years. This is an awesome thing that we get to do to have him here with us. So we really appreciate him. We really appreciate Dr. Ruth Karron, our guest speaker that's here today. We have got a tremendous access to be able to have you. Brenda Wewill, our USC specialist, our maestro, our maven from USC, has made it possible for us to invite you here. So we really look forward to your comments today. Thank you so much. We've also got some international guests here from all over the world. And those guests, we've always known that we were an international club. So naturally, to have these kind of guests here with us just simply puts a fine point on that. So we can't help but thank them. And also, I wanted to recognize this awesome thing. Adam Weiss just bailed me out this very minute. And Adam Weiss, with great matter. Thank you very much, Adam. He's one of our excellent sponsors today. And Adam does everything. He is our, he takes care of our bot on a weekly basis. All of our technical stuff that happens on this call and everything surrounding us behind the scenes, he's our guy. He's the one that makes that happen. People don't know that about him, but he's kind of amazing. So Adam, thank you very much for all you do with Great Matter and your sponsorship to Rotary LA5. We love it. We'd like to begin today, and we're going to start, and I get to kind of steal the mic first off, and I'm going to have Lance Miller offer a pledge of allegiance, but I'm going to give a little inspirational thought. And what we're going to do first is, Lance, we're going to begin with you by offering the pledge. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could take the mic, if you're here with us, Lance. I'm
here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. If you wouldn't mind offering a pledge of allegiance for us, that'd be a great way to start us off. So thank you. Please do.
You're very welcome. Sorry I didn't get back to you on your text center, but please join me in the pledge of allegiance to our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic. For which it stands one
nation
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice
for all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. We appreciate that. Lance is fantastic. One thing about Lance that you don't know, for those of you that don't know Lance has always said to me, in a moment's notice, anytime we need him, night or day, Lance can step in and take a 30-minute time slot and literally address a crowd of 500 people and be completely at ease, because this is what he does. So Lance, thank you for not just your extemporaneous abilities, but clearly your speaking prowess. You are a great example to all of us. I wanted to share with you today a little bit of just a little bit of research I was doing for my daughter. She was making me laugh this week, but it came from the fact that she's been assigned to a girls' camp. And in this girls' camp, she has got to come up with a theme, and she's got to come up with ways in which she can show the girls that there's something very simple, something they can print on a t-shirt, something they can have for all of them to inspire them and keep them going. So she lives in this beautiful mountain community. But to prepare for that, unintentionally, I was reviewing and listening to Clayton Christensen. And for those of you that knew of Clayton Christensen, he was the former Harvard professor that has passed away now, but is a very famous author, has won many awards, written several things. But one of the things that he's well known for, or has been well known for, is his books on disruption. And disruption, his basic premise or concept about this is that the large companies out there that are very, very successful don't really compete with or combat with the small little guys that are sort of picking at their heels and nipping at their toes. And he uses many examples in his books and in his messaging, and has used them. And that is, he uses the example of like Sony, when the old transistor radios came back out in the 60s and the 70s, where they were just those little pocket Sony radios, those AM scratchy, bad transistor, bad reception kind of radios that we put in our pockets. And he said they were that great little thing that kids could buy and listen to outside of their parents having them listening to rock and roll. So every single kid in the world got one of these little bad transistor radios. Well, that little tiny market led into Sony pushing it to the next thing, to the next thing, next thing. So very soon we've got, the Sony iPhone, but we've gone from Sony television, Sony radio, Sony everything. But the point is that at that time, the television tube, not the transistor, but the television tube was the market. Everything about the television tube and everything about that was what the market was all about. And nobody felt like these little tiny transistors were anything to worry about. And so the disruption came from a small little company addressing a very small market that nobody ever suspected and nobody would do anything about. Just like Mercedes doesn't really have an entry-level vehicle, just like Toyota Lexus doesn't worry about their old Corona they began with, that nobody knows that not Nissan was Datsun at one point. Nobody remembers the small little guy or worries about them because they don't think they're going to be an issue. And then before long, the little guy comes right up. And so as we were talking about this, I said to my daughter, this is the theme. This is really what you're all about. This is really what you have to focus on, because the thing that's significant is to know that no matter who you are, you cannot be weary in well-doing, because out of very small things comes that which is great. And when you're small or when you're weak, you are laying the foundation for something great. So it's important for you to remember to take heart and have a willing mind, and you can do this. And she said, okay, Dad, can you please translate that into a t-shirt slogan? And I'm like, I don't know, small is great. Weak is stronger than you think. Small but mighty. Small things will surprise you. I'm stronger than I look. Walking, running, sprinting, and winning. Life starts with a first step. Lions meow before they roar. One drop of water equals many big circles, and eagles walk before they soar. All of these small things precede that which is great. And so for each of us that seem as though we are weak, or we are in a place where we don't have influence, or perhaps our voice is not heard, or that we don't have the kind of platform or audience that would give us access to the sort of ability to express ourselves such that other people can feel the things that we feel and want them to know, and even make a difference outside of our own desk and our own space. Just remember that out of these small things come that which is magnificent. No doubt, that's what we have all learned here by being with Rotary. I find that my Rotary family has become such friends. Just this week alone, I have dipped into and tapped into some of the dearest people in Rotary to help counsel me in my work and to make it possible for me to do and have decisions made that I wouldn't have done otherwise. And they have helped me to understand how to do this. So I not only come here for Rotary because of our social contact and our intellectual stimulation, but I also come here for the service. And I come here especially because I can do business with people in Rotary that help me to shine and to grow and to fly, because I feel like I've been walking and crawling for a long time. So thank you, Rotary. Listen, Jeremy Weinglass, I want very much for you to take us away. You've always got special numbers for us. And so we're going to give you a little bit of time now to start us off with a special number. And I take that back. I'm going to do one more thing before I let you do that. I want to give a shout out here, which is kind of important. And this is a somber note, but it is not confidential. I had a marvelous conversation with Barbara Wittenberg, Russ Wittenberg's wife. And for those of you that don't know, Russ Wittenberg suffered a stroke on January 26th. And since that time, that evening, he went into the hospital at St. John's, and about 3 hours later, he was operated on. And the stroke and the clots were actually in his right side of his brain, which affected his left side of his body. So the left side of his body is still paralyzed. He went from St. John's Hospital, and he's now down in the rehabilitation center in Century City. And Barbara, his wife, believes that he is receiving the very best care that he could have possibly received. She made this great joke and said that the operation was very successful. They feel as though Russ has got so much brain power that he's got plenty left over for whatever might be necessary, because as we all know, Russ is a brainiac. The guy is just intelligent to a fault. But as our former foundation president and longtime Rotarian, Russ is a beloved member of our club and someone that we wanted to make sure that you knew to include in your prayers and your thoughts, in your expressions of goodwill and hope. Barbara said that any messages, any letters we wanted to write to her, to him, she'd be glad to accept. Anyway, she was very gracious about this. And I don't mean to be taking too much time, but this is a fellow brother that has devoted his life to Rotary and loves Rotary so much that I just wanted to let you know that they're so grateful for all of our contact. And so I wanted to express that to you. All right, Jeremy, let's turn some time over to you and set the tone for a beautiful meeting, please.
Thank you, Matt. And going off of what you said so eloquently, finding strength, the courage to find strength when we might feel weak. I've got the perfect song. This is Whitney Houston, Greatest Love of All.
Thank you very, very much, Jeremy. That was beautiful. Love that. Well, we have got our special speaker today. And before Dr. Karron begins, Dr. Karron, thank you very much. Coming all the way from Johns Hopkins and all your specialty. Brenda Wewill, our specialist from USC. You know, we've got a lot of time bragging with Brenda, but if Brenda is recommending you, we know we've got something very special. But I want you to know that before you begin speaking, you are in the company of a lot of guests and a lot of people that have come to this meeting. Already we're an international club, but we've got visitors from Dr. Ginger Lai, Dr. William Ryan from the London Rotary, and Peter Sting from Northampton, UK Rotary. So even though we are local here to LA, we get out there a little bit. So we want you to know you're in good company. But I'd like to turn a little bit of time, if I could, over to Brenda so that she could brag about you just a little bit before we begin. So Brenda, go ahead, take it away, please.
Okay, thank you, President Matt. So welcome, Dr. Karron. We are truly honored to have you in the house today, and I'm excited to have the pleasure of interviewing you. Now, I know you've been doing a lot of interviews on vaccines these days, so we really appreciate your taking the time to come to Los Angeles. And I want everyone to know it's really a treat to have Dr. Karron. She is one of the world's top experts on vaccines, no exaggeration. She's a professor with the joint appointment at both the Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Department of Pediatrics in the School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University. She also directs, through her research interest, the Center for Immunization Research and the Johns Hopkins Vaccine Initiative. And on the side, she advises the CDC, the FDA, and the WHO. This is a woman who can multitask. Dr. Karron is highly experienced with both adults and children. She's led research to find ways to build immune responses to viruses. And she has interest in the ethical issues related to vaccine development and distribution. And in 2016, she received the Robert M. Chanock Award for Outstanding Contributions to Respiratory Virus or RSV Research. So again, welcome, Dr. Karron. And I have a set of questions that I'd like to ask you, explore some timely issues, and then save space for some questions from our audience at the end. There's so much to learn about vaccines and so many different messages coming out. So I'm really happy that we have the opportunity to learn from the best. So I want to acknowledge that I think you went to medical school to take care of sick kids because you started out as a pediatrician. So I'm curious how that related to your focus and your dedication to understanding of vaccines.
Yeah, so thank you so much. That's a very kind introduction, Brenda. And I have to say, I wish I were actually out there with all of you in sunny California. Here, it's actually pretty sunny here, and I actually live outside of Washington, D.C., and it's a pretty nice day today, but we had snow this week, and ever since it snowed, my internet has been a little funky. I moved rooms, so I'm closest to the router, but if I freeze from time to time, my apologies. It's been a difficult week technically, but hopefully not. And I'm really happy to be here with you. So I guess what I would say first is I am first and foremost a pediatrician. That's how I would always introduce myself. I trained first in pediatrics and then in infectious diseases, both at the NIH and at Johns Hopkins. And it was really during my time at the NIH, I was working in a laboratory called the Laboratory of Infectious Diseases. And that laboratory really worked on viral vaccines and developed some of the ones that we either have today or are, we hope, getting close to licensure. So that was really what turned me on to vaccines and what began my career in vaccines.
So you were in the right place at the right time for the current moment, that's for sure. Now, there's a lot of rumors about the vaccines being rolled out and about vaccines themselves. We kind of think we know about them because I've heard of vaccines for things where my kids, et cetera, but then if somebody asks me a question, I'm kind of like, maybe I'm not sure I do know it exactly. So I wonder if you could just do a really, really brief tutorial for us about what they are And what are they supposed to do to help us with COVID?
Right. Well, so really, vaccines are a shortcut to protection. Is the sort of 5-second way to describe them. They, one way or another, in our body, induce an immune response to the particular germ that we're interested in this case, COVID. And they do it in a way to, we don't get the downside, the risk of actually getting sick with a germ, but we get pieces of the germ in our body, and different vaccines do that in different ways, that then our bodies can respond to and make immunity, so that when we are exposed to the germ itself, we are at the very least, and we'll talk about protection against disease, transmission, infection, but at minimum, we are protected against serious disease. So, just to be really clear, what all of us were hoping for with COVID, and what we certainly have with the 2 vaccines that we have right now, is we were actually hoping for protection against hospitalization and death, severe disease and death. We have that and more with Pfizer, BioNTech, and Mrna Vaccines, because they also seem to protect very well against any COVID disease. But in terms of thinking about our population and populations all around the world, the most important thing is really protection against severe disease and death.
So the main focus, as you're saying, was really to ensure that if somebody gets the disease, they could get a milder version and they wouldn't die from it. It would reduce the lethality of it, because we're seeing so many deaths.
Exactly.
So in terms of the vaccines, there's a lot of different ones. There's a couple different ones now, and there's some in the pipeline. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the differences are, and when we hear all those different names, what we should be trying to keep in our minds about them?
Yeah, and I think it's hard because we, the challenge, but also the incredible, I would say, triumph really, is that we have vaccines made in ways that we haven't made vaccines before. Certainly not vaccines that have been used in the general population. So the first vaccines, the ones that are available right now, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Mrna vaccines, are both mRNA vaccines. And the way that mRNA works is essentially it's a program for your cells. It tells your cells how to make protein. So this mRNA, which is a nucleic acid, you remember from high school biology, maybe DNA and RNA. The RNA is inside a lipid envelope, an oily envelope. And the reason it needs to be in that is for a couple of reasons. One is it needs to not break down. If you just injected it by itself, it would never get into the cells. And that actually that oily molecule is what helps carry that mRNA into the cells. Once it gets into the cells, it tells your cell becomes essentially a manufacturing plant for the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, that protein that we know induces protective immunity. So your cells themselves make that protein goes out into your body. You then you recognize that as a foreign protein, and you make antibodies to that and other kinds of immune responses to that. And that's what protects you against COVID, is making that immunity. So that's one kind of way. There's another, and I also do just want to say that mRNA is not DNA. It doesn't go into your genes. It doesn't alter your genes. That's, I think, been a big concern that people have. So that's one class of vaccines. Johnson vaccine, which I think a lot of you maybe have heard about, because that they just applied to the FDA for an emergency use authorization. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine it's what's called an adenovirus vectored vaccine. So what happens is the code is inside it's a virus, but it's a virus that doesn't replicate very well. It goes into your cells, replicates one time, gives your cells the machinery it needs to make that spike protein, and then it's gone. The third kind of vaccine, and company called Novovax is making this, and I think you'll hear about this later in 2021 because their trials are just underway in the US right now, it's a protein vaccine, which is a more, I would just say a more traditional kind of vaccine that we're used to, these kind of subunit protein vaccines. So that's a sort of quick and dirty on the various kinds of vaccines that we have.
Do you have any that you prefer? Are there any things that we should care about in terms of preferring one over another?
I actually don't. One of the things just to say about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is it's a single dose. So in terms of immunizing the population, and if there's time, we can talk about different approaches, whether you should give more people 1 dose or fewer people 2 doses of the 2-dose vaccines. That's a big point of controversy right now, something a lot of people are thinking about and talking about, and we can talk about that. But the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a single dose. And I would say that all of these vaccines, that the end product is the same. They all one way or another are getting your body to recognize the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and make immunity to it, so that the sort of end game is the same. From a delivery perspective, there are differences, and I'm sure you all know that the Pfizer vaccine is harder to store. You've got to store it at ultra low temperatures. But for the end user, that probably doesn't matter much. So I think these are all actually really good vaccines.
So the issue of the idea that if you're going to get 1 or 2 doses, I wonder how that relates to herd immunity, and if you could explain to us a little bit if that is connected, and what's that concept of herd immunity? Is that going to be something we're going to be able to achieve? How long is it going to take, etc.?
Yeah, so herd immunity, it's really complicated in the case of this germ because the ground is shifting under our feet a little bit with variant viruses, and we can talk about that in a minute. I think what you were asking about is, one of the things that is true is it would be great if we could give everybody vaccine tomorrow, right? That would be wonderful. But the truth is that not only do we not have enough people to deliver and systems to deliver the vaccine, we just plain don't have enough vaccine to be able to do that tomorrow. So one of the questions that has arisen is, the Pfizer vaccine is 2 doses 3 weeks apart. That's how it was studied. And the weeks apart. But there are some data to suggest that you actually get it's limited data, but you get fairly good protection after a single dose. And so some people are asking the question, would it be better to give more people a first dose, even if you have to wait for that second dose? And even if what we know from vaccines in general is, and this probably is surprising to people, but in some ways, when you have a vaccine that requires more than 1 dose, very often the longer you wait between the doses, actually the better your immune response. We know that from a lot of other vaccines. And so the only harm in waiting is if you're not really fully protected between that dose 1 and dose 2, right? That's the downside. But there are, some of my colleagues who I hold in very high esteem, and I think it's, like I said, I think it's a point of debate, have said, maybe we should just it's all about shots in arms, and how many shots can we get into how many arms as quickly as possible. Let's not worry about the second doses right now. Just get as many first doses out as we can, and then think about the second doses after that for vaccines that require 2 doses. So herd immunity. So just to define it, it is when enough of the population is protected that there's not a lot of transmission of the virus in the community because there's so much protection in the population. What makes this, so there have been a lot of mathematical models that have tried to predict how much immunity we need to get there. The sort of fly in the ointment, the difficulty there is with these variant viruses coming, we don't exactly know what that number is, both because these vaccines are certainly, I really do believe they're going to protect against severe disease with these other viruses, but they really may not protect against infection. And they for sure, I think there's a very good chance that they won't protect against transmission, right, from one person to another, if there's a lot of difference. So you may be immunized, but you may not be contributing to herd immunity if those variant viruses take over. You will still be protected yourself, but you may not be contributing so much to community protection. So it's very much, it's a moving target, to be honest.
So when do we get to the point where there's been enough distribution of virus just because people have already been transmitting it, and then with the vaccine to where we could kind of rest easier and feel like we're in the clear?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to say that this is everybody's question, right? My goodness, when am I going to be able to throw away my masks? And when is life going to begin to become normal again? When can we begin to go back to where we were? I think we need to see, I do believe that in the United States, it's going to be in this, I think we may not be 100% back to normal, but I am thinking that by the end of this calendar year, if not before, I think that things will begin to become much more normal. Certainly we will have enough vaccine of the current vaccine to vaccinate our population. And as long as we don't have variants that are too terribly different, I think we will be in really good shape. I do just want to say something about global disease and global responsibility. So I'm in a Department of International Health, and I think about global health a lot. And I do think that we also have a responsibility to provide vaccine to the world. I think we have a national responsibility, and I think we have a global responsibility. And I was very glad to see that we joined COVAX, which is what we can talk about what that is, but that is the global vaccine supply mechanism, particularly for countries that cannot afford vaccines themselves. And I think not only really for 2 reasons, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because, we can't have health security without global health security. If we are a global village, and as long as COVID is not controlled elsewhere in the world, we will suffer as well. So we really, because in many parts of the world, I think we will be I hope, knock wood, in reasonable shape by the end of 2021 in the US. I don't think that will be true in many parts of the world that are going to be slower to be able to get vaccines.
I am curious if there are any special subpopulations where they haven't been studied sufficiently, or where some people should think twice about taking the vaccine until there's more research or more surety about it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, and this is something I won't, but I could talk about for a long time. Interested in even in issues related to pregnant women and immunization of pregnant women. And the truth is that pregnant women are at increased risk of severe outcomes compared to non-pregnant individuals of the same age. The truth is I wish we had trials directly in pregnant women. We don't. We do have data from something called BeSafe, which many of you may already know about, because for those of you who've already gotten COVID vaccine, you were asked to sign up on the BeSafe app. It's a CDC app, and you provide information. Right now, there's information, 20,000 pregnant women have gotten vaccinated and registered on BeSafe. So we will be able to collect data from them to inform others. So that's one group. A lot of people ask me about children. For obvious reasons, they ask me about children. I will just say that the Pfizer vaccine can be given to kids over 16. So older teenagers can get the Pfizer vaccine. Pfizer is now studying these vaccines gradually moving down in age, as is Moderna, gradually moving down to younger children. As we know, kids are not, thank goodness, as severely affected with COVID as adults are, generally speaking. And there are, as I think all of you know, there are some side effects of these vaccines. Those side effects may actually, the younger you are, the worse they may be. So it's another reason to move carefully and cautiously into children, but those studies are moving ahead.
Okay, so we're really learning as we go, because this is such a rapidly changing picture. So I have a feeling that some of my colleagues here who are listening to you may have some questions, and just to make sure we're honoring your time and the program's time, I'm curious if maybe Matt, are you monitoring questions, and could you help us identify some audience questions for Dr. Karron?
Absolutely. Myself and Melinda Montrose are working together, so we're all over it. Melinda's, as you know, she's all over this with me, so thank you. We'll keep. Brenda, you're doing a marvelous job, and Dr. Karron, we really appreciate your commentary. It's very helpful to all of us. It's very timely. It's a perfect moment to hear your words. So we'd like to turn the time over for questions from anybody from the club here that might have something they'd like to speak up. I know we've got a lot of wonderful doctors in our own club right now, but love to be able to find out more. I've got a question right here that's come up, and that is from Salvador Farfan, if I'm saying that correctly, Salvador. Broadly speaking, how is this pandemic played out compared to 1918? And are there lessons or expectations about the terminus of this current pandemic? Salvador, thank you for the question.
Yeah. So what an interesting question. I think, I've thought about this. I think all of us have thought about this from time to time, certainly over the course of 2020. One thing that I've thought about is the rapidity of spread and our knowledge of spread. Think about the fact that in 1918, you might know what was going on in your community, but you had no clue, certainly, of what was going on in Europe or Africa or Asia. Probably no idea. So your knowledge was confined, and spread was probably a bit slower. One of the things that's really been interesting, and we still don't understand it, is as we look at 1918, the bulk of severe disease, well, that's not true, not the bulk of severe disease, but the case fatality rate and the rate of severe disease was much higher in poor countries. And for whatever reason, that has not quite played out that way with this pandemic. So our case fatality rates in the US are much greater. So they're pretty high in South Africa, but they're actually much lower in many other countries in Africa. And we don't quite understand why that is exactly. One of the disturbing things and something that I think about, because I certainly think about it in the context of 1918 flu, is the long-term sequelae, the things that we call long COVID, right? Certainly for flu, there were long-term issues, long-term neurologic issues. You know, the late, great neurologist Oliver Sacks wrote this book called Awakenings about people who had post-influenza encephalopathy. We don't understand long COVID, and what's really turning out to be true is there are even people who have relatively mild disease initially when they're infected, but have long-term issues. And I think we're just beginning to understand what the burdens of those are going to be. I mean, the biggest difference is we made vaccines in 11 months. We made vaccines in 11 months. And certainly in 1918, we didn't have flu vaccines. And so, you know, we hope that we will be able to turn the tide of the pandemic much more quickly. But I guess those are just some of my preliminary thoughts.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for the answer, Dr. Karron. We've got Dr. Sumi Kawarwatani from our club here would like to ask a question. Sumi, please go ahead.
My question is that there's been some recent discussion on how there doesn't seem to be vaccine distribution equity for those who are not as well off versus those who are. And your thoughts on how or what should be done to move that forward towards more equity?
Yeah, so I could actually talk about I don't know what's being done in Los Angeles, but I can talk about what's going on in my community. I describe myself as bi-urban because I work in Baltimore and I live in DC, so I tend to know about both cities a little bit. We've certainly had issues with equity and distribution actually in both communities, in Baltimore and in DC. And what we've started doing because of that, and particularly in DC, is we first targeted, DC is divided into wards, that's what they're called. And so there was preferential enrollment of people who lived in certain wards. We've now started going door to door, actually trying to sign people up in those wards to get vaccine, you know, to really, and bringing mobile vans to really improve access in a very, very granular way. And then the other piece of it, so there's the sort of logistics piece, right? And then the other piece is addressing hesitancy in communities that have, you know, have reason to fear scientific advances, right? That because of the legacy. You know, I was lucky enough to be at a couple of events. I think it's really helpful for members of communities that have distrust to see leaders in the community. And in particular, I think about Kizzmekia Corbett, who is a 35-year-old African-American woman who was, you know, intensely involved in the development of the Mrna vaccine. And her mentor, Dr. Rabowski, who is the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore College, who actually was a participant in a vaccine trial of
Hoping she'll come back.
distinguished members of the community communicate about it.
Dr. Karron, sorry about that. Dr. Karron, you froze for just a minute there. We were just kind of hanging in there, holding our breath. Listen, we've got limited time, but we're going to do 3 more questions. And for those of you that want to ask a question that don't have time, please put them in the chat. And Brenda, if you wouldn't mind, please share those with Dr. Karron so that she might be able to respond perhaps in writing to you later on, and that we might be able to get responses back because there's so much to discuss, but we'll try to keep this brief right now. Ken Chong, we're going to start with you, and then we'll go to Denise Anthony briefly, and then we'll end with Dr. Carmen Shea. So please go ahead, Ken.
Hi, Dr. Karron. Thank you for being with us today. I kind of have two quick questions. One is, I know people are concerned about the speed with the FDA trials, like, you know, and am I getting something that's been tested enough? Do you have any data on how many people actually got, you know, that it was tested on, where they determined, yes, it's safe? And then the other part which you kind of mentioned about like the debate on how the vaccine should be distributed, one shot with a lot of people or the two shot. If they change their mind, because it's such a big ship with all the logistics and distribution and whatever, can they even turn the ship at this point and say, okay, let's change our strategy and just give everyone one shot and wait longer?
Yeah. So quickly to answer your first question, so 30,000 people in the Moderna trial, 45,000 people in the Pfizer trial. Typical trials to see, efficacy trials to see if vaccines work, are about 10-fold lower, on the order of 3,000 to 5,000. So many more people. So lots of data on safety and efficacy. So that's the quick thing. Your second question, which is more complicated, it's a hard one. I think in particular jurisdictions, they might be able to delay a little bit, but you're right that even both the logistics and the communication is a challenge. I have to agree.
Denise Anthony, please go ahead, and then Dr. Shea, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Karron. This is very good. I've been talking to a lot of doctors because I used to serve on the boards of different hospitals here in Los Angeles. And so I've talked to them, and everybody has their different views. Another pediatrician says, don't trust Johnson & Johnson. You know, I mean, you just keep hearing these things. What I really want to know though is what, antibodies, because I give blood at Cedars a few times a year, hospital, and in December, they came up saying you have antibodies. They said, still wear your mask, still, your distance and all that, which is fine. We're stuck at home, working at home. But antibodies, I was told, you let everybody else, the older group, even though we fit in, my husband and I both have antibodies, we fit in the older group, but they're saying, you wait until the back of the line. That's, the doctors are saying that, the TV is saying that. So I'm just wondering, how safe are we with antibodies?
Yeah, so I don't know why I'm echoing, but I would just say that I don't know how much you have in the way of antibody. It's sort of hard to know, and all these tests are a little bit different. It is true that the initial CDC guidance was to wait 90 days if you had antibodies, and that wasn't for safety reasons or anything. It was exactly as you said. It was letting other people get ahead of you in the line when the vaccine supply was limited. I would say it's a personal, I think you should get vaccinated at some point when you can. I think it's probably a personal decision and even a discussion with your doctor and thinking about what it is you're doing that would allow you to decide when that moment is. But you should get vaccinated, because the reason is because the antibody levels that you get with vaccination in most cases are much higher than the levels you would have with that natural infection if you probably had a mild or asymptomatic infection.
Thank you, Denise. Oh, you're on mute, Denise.
Yeah, back last January, a year ago, I was very sick. I couldn't get out of bed for a week now. And the doctors thought it was a lot of flu. So I keep thinking, maybe I already had some kind of definite experience with COVID. But back then, before it became known.
Right.
Dr. Shea, why don't you finish this up, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My question is much more on a global health issue. So thank you very much that you have experience and are involved with global health. As you know, that there is a lot of talk about disease X, that disease, that virus, there are 1.67 million viruses and the Global Virome Project. Can you tell us a little bit about this looming disease X and how or what are we doing to prevent our within our immunization and preparing for that?
Yeah, so I would say, so I think Disease X, there's an organization called CEPI, which was specifically developed it has many donors. It's physically located now in the UK, but it's a global organization, and it's specifically meant to develop vaccines against things that could become epidemic, right? And they call those disease acts. We would say that SARS-CoV-2 it's not the last disease acts, but it's probably the first disease acts. And I would just say that one example of this preparedness is if you think about the Mrna vaccine, part of the reason that vaccine was made so quickly is because investigators at the NIH had been working on other related coronaviruses. They'd been working on MERS, they'd been working on the original SARS, because they were thinking about coronaviruses. That investment in research that doesn't have an immediate payoff is critical. It's critical. It's what allows you to be prepared and to move rapidly when you have a new epidemic or a pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Very
very much.
interesting. Thank you, Dr. Shea. Appreciate that. Dr. Karron, you don't know this, but even though we're out of time for questions, we have so many more things we want to ask and say to you, but we really appreciate you being here with us today, because not only do we know how valuable your time is, but we appreciate the insight and information that you provided us. Thank you so much. This is what you didn't know. You don't know about my wife's spoon. This is her wooden spoon that she makes caramels, jams, chocolate, all the special goodies that we send out, and she makes sure that I send them out. And this is a special gift to our speakers in Rotary, that when they speak to us, they get a special homemade jar of jam from my wife. So this is coming directly from her spoon. This is the same spoon that we ring the Rotary bell with. But at the same time, Dr. Karron, we're presenting you with a special gift. And the gift is a $1,000 donation has been made in your name to the RLA5 Scholarship Fund, so that our funds can go just directly to those children and that are very high performing, but have very high need college bound students that are all here with us in LA County. And so we wanted to thank you, and we'll send that to you. We'll send the jam to you. So what we want to make sure is that we've got the best address to send these things to you. So you might share that with Brenda if we don't already have it, okay? But we really appreciate you. We're just going to take care of a little bit of business. You're welcome to stay for another 5 minutes, but just a little bit more business before we sign off, and wanted to thank you. And before you go,
thank you so much. Really,
again, a huge
pleasure. Wonderful, wonderful questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karron.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to turn some time. Brenda, you've got a little bit. Thank you again, Brenda, for sharing Dr. Karron with us. And you've got a couple of thoughts you wanted to share on REI. So we'll let you do that before we turn the time back over to Melinda. So please.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge that back in the spring, when there was a lot of social unrest around race and equity, it kind of came to our club in a couple of ways and raised those issues. And we began to have some conversations with the idea that we wanted to be sure. We didn't realize, and we started to find out, that there were some people in the club who maybe didn't feel as welcome as we would have expected or assumed or wanted them to be. And I know I'm a longtime Rotary Club member, but as new members come in, we want to make sure that they're fully welcomed, and we want to have a diverse club. And so with the community conversations, there was a wonderful committee that put that together and then brought to the board a list of suggestions and recommendations to move things forward. And one of the first things that came up to the board that the board has committed to and supported is the wanting to really make our club fully aligned with Rotary International, and looking at what they do besides the mission, service above self, besides the 4-way test. Rotary International has a statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they also have a statement on anti-racism. And so we have adapted that into the kinds of things that we now feel directly committed to for the club. And we are now looking at ways to be able to integrate those concepts and the spirit and the goal of full diversity, equity, and inclusion into all of the operations of the club as a whole. And so there'll be more coming out about that. But there is, I think somebody was going to put in the chat the link to that. What we did was
They did.
It's there. Okay, so take a look at that. It's just basically a one-pager that has all of the Rotary International kinds of pieces that we want to make sure our club is fully aligned with. And we've made that commitment to move forward to really do that at this point.
Thank you, Brenda. And the very things you're talking about are the resolution that was passed by the board that identifies exactly what you're speaking about is in the El Rodeo this week. I just did a brief introduction to that, so you can all go to El Rodeo and read that right now as well. So thank you very much, Christy. Thanks for everybody to bringing this to our attention. And Brenda, thank you very much. We'd like to turn the time over to, please, Melinda, share with us upcoming programs, our 50-50, and let's get it done. Thank you.
Yeah, let's see if I can be slick with the screen share changes here. Okay, so upcoming programs next week, we have Rear Admiral Len Herring from the U.S. Navy visiting us with a message on climate change and Rotary's new area of focus. And then February 19th, we have C-SPAN visiting us to talk about how to make sense of all the news that's flying at us from all the various places today. February 26th, Dr. Jane Ward on gender diversity. And then on March 5th, we have Christine McKay, who will talk to us about the art of negotiation. And then a few other things to put on your radar. Children's Court Committee today, I put the link in the chat. It's right after this meeting, so please join us if you're interested in getting involved. You heard us talk about it early in the meeting, but the Cedar Sinai blood drive is on February 12th. And then Morning Business Exchange is back February 16th. This will happen monthly, 8:15 a.m. sharp. Past President Charisse is running these, so you know it will not be a second late. And then a save the date here for you all. Mark your calendar. We have another joint meeting of the first 5 Rotary clubs upcoming. It will take place April 22nd on Earth Day. And then let's get into the 50-50. So today's pot, everybody, is $93.
Wrong Weiss.
Did you say wrong Weiss, Adam?
I absolutely did.
Eric Weiss, you are $93 richer today than you.
I have never won this ever in all my years. So, hey!
Eric, I think it's because you're being so effusive on the chat today. Your compliments are through the roof. So
it was an awesome meeting, you guys. Everybody, fantastic. Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions. I know we had several. Mike Burkham, I'm sorry we didn't get to yours, but we really appreciate everybody putting it out there. So Melinda, please continue.
No, just closing remarks for you, Matt, if you have them. Otherwise, we do have a song and actually a dedication and then a song today. So
I just have one comment. As I was giving my daughter T-shirt one-liners to go ahead and express the idea of out of small things come that which is great, I said, well, just say Diary of a One-Time Wimpy Kid, and then you're good to go. And all the kids will understand that. So anyway, I'm going to end this meeting before Melinda takes off on music. Thank you very much, Melinda, for all you've done. And Charisse, Paul Ekstrand, we want to excuse him today. He's at the Large Club Conference, which is why our president-elect is not here, because he is one of our sponsors for Enthusiasts. And thank you very much to Paul. That's all I've got. So please, Melinda, take it away.
Today's Outbound music dedication comes from Peter Weinberger.
I think we'd all agree that when it comes to performers from the 1960s who remind us of Matt Ball, one name immediately comes to mind. You know it, James Brown. Now, Matt and James have so much in common, starting with their nicknames. Now, as you know, James Brown had several nicknames, many of which could easily fit with Max. Names like Soul Brother #1, or perhaps the Godfather of Soul. Both absolutely apt for Matt. But there's one name that really stands out. James Brown was known as the hardest working man in show business. And like James Brown, we all know that Matt is the hardest working man in Rotary. Amen, Brother Matt. But the similarity doesn't end with James Brown's sobriquet. There's more. Some of James Brown's songs absolutely scream Matt Ball. And of course, one of those classic James Brown songs that really makes me think of Matt Ball is, I know you must all be thinking the same as me. Yes, here it is. That song called Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Doesn't that just say Matt Ball? Well, why? Because what was one of Matt's singular achievements this year? It was LA5's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. But those and other songs really shrink in comparison to the one James Brown song that is the absolute epitome of Matt Ball. Now, like Matt, James Brown loved his children. He had 9 of them. Well, Matt may not have had 9 children, but he's darn close. He has 7. And with 7 children, there's clearly no more apt James Brown song that really fits Matt Ball than Hit It, Millennium.
Hysterical. Best music intro ever. Bye, everybody.